I don't think it's useful to just sit or like kind of enter this domain in fear. I think it's important to like stay open to the possibility that this could be great.
Welcome to the Regeneration Will Be Funded. I'm your host, Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're having conversations about regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. How can we build an economy that's in service to life? Brought to you by Ma Earth. You can find all of our conversations at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Stephen Reid, and this was a stimulating conversation about the Metacrisis, crypto and Web3, and AI. Stephen has such a wide and deep understanding of these topics. I voice some of the common pushbacks against AI, fears and risks, and we explore how AI might benefit humanity. This was a fun conversation. I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's dive in with Stephen Reid. We're here today with Stephen Reid. Stephen is a transdisciplinary technologist. He's taught courses on Web3 and now AI. Thank you so much for doing this, Stephen.
It's my great pleasure. Yeah.
All right, let's start from the top. What is a transdisciplinary technologist?
Well, I have quite a technical background. I have master's degrees in physics and complexity science. My father worked in IT, so I've actually been around computers and code for as long as I can remember. Code is a bit like a second language to me. And I have spent a large chunk of my recent life involved more in the world of psychedelics and plant medicine. But over the past 3 or 4 years, I've really been going back to my roots in a way, my technological roots, and have taught courses on a number of technology topics, most notably around Web3. And now I'm actually just starting to teach an introduction to AI course. And yeah, I'm really interested in just how these different technologies weave together, and even more importantly, that how they can actually be of service to regenerative and resilient futures.
And I've been following your newsletter for some time. It's a wonderful newsletter. I was just sharing with you beforehand. I really like it. I like the cadence. I like the long list of many links and events and things you're reading, but the synthesis and curation, I'm always finding interesting things and bookmarking it, and we'll put links in the show notes, of course. I've been watching your synthesis of the Web3 space, and just kind of at a cursory level, understanding that you've been teaching some courses and so forth. But I did notice that you were working around this frame, Metacrisis. Mm-hmm. And if you could share more about that and some of the initiatives you've been involved with there.
Yeah, so I'm currently involved with a project called Metacrisis.xyz, which I co-founded with Kevin Iwaki. Really is planting a flag in the sand for people interested or familiar with the framing of the Metacrisis in the Web3 community. Now we're describing it as a collective of technologists interested in wise responses to the Metacrisis. So kind of a bit broader than just Web3, partly in that's response to just all that's gone on with AI over the past year or more now. And so is it worth speaking a bit about what the Metacrisis is?
I'd love to get into terminology. Yeah.
Okay. So the Metacrisis is the idea that many of the important challenges, crises that we see out there in the world today, the climate crisis, the ongoing crisis of inequality and poverty in the world, we could say, many other dimensions of the ecological crisis that you could understand by studying the kind of these reports on planetary boundaries. I think there was a new report released just in the past couple of weeks that said we've now, I think, crossed 7 of the 9, is it?
Yeah, 6 or 7, yeah.
So it's it'd be
very bad.
If it was just climate, that would be great news, but clearly isn't. It's not just climate and carbon. There's, we're facing a number of important challenges, and the idea that Metacrisis, thinkers are suggesting is that these crises are interrelated. First of all, and secondly, that they have common drivers, or often they're referred to in this world as generator functions. And one example of a generator function, it would be multipolar traps. So this people likely be familiar with this idea in the context of the arms race or tragedy of the commons. It has a few different manifestations, but let's take the idea of an arms race. So you can have like a number of let's go with villages or something, that if we want to take get a bit old fashioned, that have been at peace with each other for years, and then one village discovers some new way of making a certain kind of weapon, and like proceeds with that. The other villages sort of witness that this is happening, and this is kind of the important part for me about like arms races, multipolar traps. So a second village, like they don't want to be making these advanced weapons. They were totally fine with just this, this peaceful order where no one was having to like invest time and resources in creating this new weaponry. But that second village thinks, well, if we don't start making this advanced weaponry, then like only these first guys are going to have it, and then they could wipe us out. So we don't want to do this, but we're going to do it, because if anyone's going to have the advanced weaponry, like it should be the good guys. It should be us. It should be the good guys. And
right.
So, this fascinating dynamic with multipolar traps, that it drives like even good people to do bad things, if you like, or to things that actually like that they don't really want to do. And this is where the idea of Moloch comes from. This Moloch, it was originally this like Canaanite deity of child sacrifice, I think, but has now in the kind of Metacrisis frame has been invoked as this kind of impersonal, or to point to this kind of impersonal force that is somehow as if there is some deity that is like pushing us towards the dark side, even though we might not want to be heading in that direction. I actually think it's quite a helpful concept to invoke, because it actually shows that the problem is not necessarily with the individual agents in the system. There are systemic challenges, or another way of describing that would be coordination failures that we need to find intelligent, effective, wise ways to overcome.
I'm curious how you feel the distinction between metacrisis and polycrisis.
Yeah, metacrisis versus polycrisis. I think that that clearly there's some overlap. Like polycrisis for me is alerts people to the fact that we're not just facing a climate crisis, that we're facing many crises. It doesn't always or naturally suggest to me the idea of generator functions or some kind of like underlying dynamics or like common drivers to those problems. And I think for me, metacrisis is more suggestive of that. But increasingly, people are kind of using these words in the same breath to mean quite similar things.
Yeah. I guess my only slight concern about metacrisis is the frame is because of the technology community's tendency to, sometimes overly reduce things. This idea that we can just pull one thread and then everything will be solved. And then what does that leave out? Whereas I like polycrisis in some form of its more pluralistic recognition of the many problems that we face in different timelines and different ways. It's a tiny nitpick, but it is something that kind of niggles me a bit when I see so much of the technology community going with metacrisis and then other communities kind of sticking to polycrisis. And not to be critical of it, because I do think it's very useful.
It's important to be critical of it. And I mean that I guess I already think, and that further suggests to me that they absolutely both have their place, depending on what exactly we're trying to emphasize. Do we want to emphasize like the manifold and like a kind of interrelated nature of the situation that we're in, or do we want to emphasize the kind of common roots, the common drivers? And there are another actual, I mentioned Moloch, like another almost way of pointing at the same thing in a bit more of a kind of poetic and abstract way would be Wetiko. I don't know whether any thinkers have kind of brought
come
that
up a couple times, but please.
So I think I actually learned about this from Alnor originally.
He wrote a beautiful paper on it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So as far as I remember, Wetiko actually originally referred to a kind of affliction, a condition that came about. This is in a kind of indigenous North American context, I should say, that came about when certain indigenous North American peoples were kind of like got lost in the wild and ended up having to eat the flesh of another human to survive the time that they were out of their home, their tribe. And when they came back to the tribe, it said they were never the same again. That they had a kind of a dead look behind their eyes. I think an icy heart. I think that's something that was often said, and that they strangely had this like hunger for more human flesh. So Wetiko literally meant a kind of the affliction of cannibalism. And the desire to cannibalize. And then when white settlers came over to North America, the indigenous peoples there diagnosed the white settlers with this same kind of condition in a slightly more abstract or broader sense. But they could see that the way that the white settlers were like pillaging the earth and consuming resources at an obviously unsustainable rate suggested that they were sick in some way, which I think is a really very useful way of thinking about it, and it's quite an obvious way of thinking about it actually. And once after a bit of contemplation, that these people are not well. Can they not see they're eating themselves? If we take a slightly broader concept of ourselves as not just this skin and bone, or even not just our species, but like the kind of wider ecology that supports all life, including human life. And then in more recent times, kind of Wetiko has been coming up again to kind of linked to that that kind of cannibalistic concept on ecology, as framed as a kind of mind virus. Like there's a certain similarity to Moloch. People might talk about being kind of possessed by Moloch, or like infected by Wetiko. And actually, for me, they're complementary concepts. Like Moloch points to a kind of this external, impersonal force that is driving some of the worst behaviors that we see, and Wetiko is more the kind of internal dimension of that, and how that there we are, we're like kind of greed and consumerism lives inside us all, and is not necessarily an easy thing to like identify and root out. Is something to be actively worked with. That the Metacrisis is inside of each of us in a way. It links back to the piece on inner work, I guess, and the importance of plant medicines, which in some sense you could say are a kind of antidote to Wetiko.
Right. And in addition to kind of the observation that plant medicines and the inner work is such an antidote, I'm curious, especially around multipolar traps, what is your current lens on, broadly speaking, how do we prevent these arms races? What are the interventions and medicines of this moment?
Yeah, it's a big one. So just to kind of give a slightly more topical example of the manifestation of multipolar traps, which can be a little bit abstract. I guess, I spoke about arms race. People are aware of nuclear arms races, and there's recently been more talk, sadly, about the possibility of nuclear war in the past year or so than in a long time. Yeah. But the climate crisis is also a kind of multipolar trap. Every nation on Earth knows that we need to take dramatic climate action, and every nation on Earth, you could argue, would prefer a world where there was no climate crisis. Yet here we are. And why is that? Well, one way of looking at that would be to say, well, no country wants to be the first country to decarbonize. So far as, at least in the short to medium term, there is a certain cost to that. Then if we do it and no one else does, then we're going to get screwed. They're still going to be burning the fossil fuel. We will have, invested all this money in these other technologies, which for at least in certain ways might affect our global competitiveness and all this kind of stuff. And actually, this frame has come up in the UK media over the past couple of weeks. We've got the Prime Minister here, Rishi Sunak, saying just this kind of thing, saying the UK has already done more than its fair share. It's time for us to sit back a bit and let others catch up, which I think is a highly dubious.
Just changed the goalposts.
A highly dubious claim. But but how taking the climate example, how do we get to a place where countries are really are not thinking in those terms? They're really just we're just going to do this, and we're just going to do this as well and as quickly as possible, and trust that that our actions might even like inspire others to kind of walk the same path. So it is about trust. Like, so the question, how can we like find that trust in life, in ourselves as individuals, and then in communities, and even like nation states? How do you create trusting societies? How do you create loving societies? And that, like I say, also, that to me it seems like that love also starts within. And actually, the main way I've been exploring that over the past couple of years is through meditative practice and in the Buddhist tradition, and just seeing the incredible power and potency of metta, of loving kindness meditations. It's kind of simple stuff in a way, but it's really started to land with me over the past year in particular, that this idea that how we see the world affects what we perceive, and then affects our experience of the world. If we choose to see the world through loving eyes, then we start to perceive the world in loving ways, which then means we start to inhabit a loving world. And I find it extremely potent to just to actually practice like metta meditation on a regular basis, and experience is quite kind of magical effect. It does feel magical of my experience of the world changing. So I think there is there's no doubt to me that there is a really important role for this kind of inner work, whether that's through meditation or plant medicine or whatever else it might be. And of course, that's not enough. That we there's never any point that we are completely healed, or we're completely finished with that inner work. That as far as I have sense and experience, that there has to be those two things come in parallel, and they can absolutely support and encourage one another. To be out on the streets, or to be working on devoting my technological skills to ideas like the Metacrisis or the climate crisis, actually helps me to sit on a cushion with like deeper peace, and then find like getting to like deeper meditative states, and which then produce insights that then I can sort of then weave back into my working life. So yeah, I think they do go together.
Yeah, it really resonates for me in my own personal journey and experiences as well. And when I think about those moments where I really experience the universe as so generous, and where I can rest into that trust, and then how healthy that is, and how it cascades across my actions. And when I find those moments, they're typically, coming out of a meditation, coming out of a retreat, coming out of plant medicine, these deeper inner types of work. It's not been coming out of the boardroom or necessarily in the action. But then I'm left with still the desire and the impulse to like do this, and like still get back onto the playing field. And then of course the equal is true as well. And there's a desire to then go home and go in the forest. And so I'm curious how that is manifesting for you in terms of turning your attention to AI, and how you're making sense of that space. And I feel like you're much further ahead than most of us, for certain. And so what are you learning there? What are you observing? And how are you synthesizing it for these courses that you're teaching?
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that like really big things are going on in that field. It's been fascinating actually learning the history of AI deep learning in particular, and about how we were actually pretty close, like even in the 50s. Like Professor Frank Rosenblatt invented the perceptron, like the kind of a kind of single neural network, if you like, and actually was doing kind of conducting experiments using these kind of mechanical computers, and at the time that various things weren't quite aligned for it to really blow up. But there was another almost moment in the 80s with the invention of back propagation, which allowed which is like the way of figuring out how to train multi-layer neural networks. But the computers weren't quite fast enough at the time. There wasn't really enough data to train them with, and there were some problems still with the kind of software and algorithms that they were using, but also pretty close at that time. And then kind of finally we've got this third time lucky in a way from like the 2010s onwards, when people realized, okay, wow, actually, we've got GPUs now, like we've got like a sufficient compute to really do this well. We've got vast amounts of high quality data. We can actually train these things with, and there's been further improvements in the software and algorithms, and then it's just been this absolute takeoff moment. Like now everything is aligned, and obviously huge strides have been made. Like I still have this. It still takes my breath away often to interact with Midjourney or ChatGPT, or actually I code in an AI assisted IDE called Cursor, which you can kind of, it's as if you have like an extremely capable pair programmer to kind of chat with if in case you get a bit stuck with something or you need an idea for something, or it has fantastic autocomplete, which is actually one of the three exponentials that people are talking about in AI right now. So I mentioned those three things, like compute, data, and software. There's kind of exponentials going on with all three of those things, like continuing exponential track of computing power. I mean, Moore's law is maybe slowed a bit, but is still like there's very significant strides being made there. There's more and more data being produced that shows no sign of slowing down. But the last one is almost the most interesting to me. Is like now that we are able to use these AIs to much more quickly and effectively improve the algorithms, right. And in some cases actually simply just telling the AI, please improve yourself, and that's kind of gets us into the realms of kind of intelligence explosion and super intelligence and so on, which is kind of maybe another topic. But it's a field that's moving very, very fast, and there are many people quite understandably are very concerned about how fast it's moving, concerned about so-called AI alignment, and just asking the question of, do we really understand effectively how to encode human values and human desires into this software? And if we don't, then maybe we should take a time out until we've really figured out that question properly before these things kind of get away from us in some sense. But my feeling, my intuition is there's still huge possibility and potential for this to turn out well. It's kind of linked to all that we've been speaking about so far. At this point, at least,
you've been doing a lot of loving kindness meditations.
Well, right. Well, that's kind of the link. At this point, at least, it is still human beings designing these systems. If the human beings themselves, can be coming from a place of genuinely good intentions, of loving kindness, of compassion, of a desire to truly improve life for on this planet for all beings, then why shouldn't AI be a very useful tool towards those goals? And I also take the point that that our economic system, that capitalism itself, is acting in a way as a kind of unaligned super intelligence. That is, the capitalism is a kind of is what it kind of reminds me of what we're saying about Moloch and Wetiko. It's kind of capitalism as software running on all of us. That maybe if I wanted to be, maybe we could say turbo capitalism or neoliberal capitalism if we wanted to give capitalism a little bit of slack. I don't know, but that it's that it's software running on all of us, and has actually been driving us to some quite messed up direction, or towards some quite messed up directions, towards ecological crisis. And what's the phrase? If you're driving off a cliff, do you really need a faster car? That was someone's summary of one of Daniel Schmachtenberger's recent podcasts on AI, where and he's very concerned about it. He's like, given how we can see our economic system is set up, is there any reason to think that AI is going to do anything other than simply accelerate that? and just accelerate the kind of ecological crisis that we're in. And yes, I mean, I think this is a really important angle to consider as well. But it is a kind of intuition. It's like that is driving my interest in this. Of like, there's I have a feeling there could be something radically beneficial about this technology. Part of that actually of that intuition is being driven by the kind of open source AI movement. I don't think there's any reason to think things would turn out well if this technology did just stay in the hands of like a handful of like super rich technology companies. But it's amazing what the open source AI community are doing. And although it's most of the best open source models are not quite at par with, say, GPT-4, it's getting pretty close. And that's just and then it comes down in a way to one's like belief. Do you believe in humanity? like if it's not just like a select group of people that have access to the technology, if it's like everyone basically and almost for free, then it's like, well, yeah, what is humanity gonna do with that? Like, do we believe that on balance that there are that people do have a desire to see life on this planet flourish? That and then that makes me think of people saying, well, you only need one crazy person to like decide to use the AI to invent some chemical weapon or whatever. And it's complicated, but I don't think it's useful to just sit or like kind of enter this domain in fear. I think it's important to like stay open to the possibility that this could be great.
Yeah, fascinating. So many thoughts and so many questions. I guess we've already referenced Al Noor, so I'll reference him again. One phrase he uses a lot is being contextually relevant, and I feel that my own interest in a lot of the exponential technologies is that I feel like they are so fundamentally important in terms of how they're going to influence the near future and are already influencing the present. And so any really, effort to critically examine humanity's journey on planet Earth in this time and where we're headed, like in the absence of understanding these exponential technologies, to me feels like it's an absence of contextual relevance, at least a key piece. Doesn't mean we shouldn't also understand our history. It doesn't mean we should also understand social justice issues. It doesn't, but it is a key piece, and I feel dissatisfied at times with its absence in a lot of the environmental movement or in a lot of other movements that I feel identified with. That being said, so that's what brings me interested. I don't have the same intuitive optimism, maybe that I'm inferring from you that that it's necessarily on the right track, and more from the line of thinking like that the tools are exceeding the consciousness. Consciousness is a fairly inadequate word for it, but it's like the wisdom, right? Like we're clearly demonstrating war-like tendencies, ecological destructive tendencies, and an inability to coordinate at a collective level. And so I do believe in the humans. I want to say yes to that statement, of course. And human ingenuity, human goodness and kindness, like at a fundamental level, I really do believe that. But like that's not what's playing out in many ways. And yes, there's good trends and there's counter trends and so forth. But if we just add on and layer on extraordinarily powerful tools into the current systems and paradigms, and so then therefore, like, do we think AI is going to alter those paradigms fundamentally? Do we think it's going to come in and change those systems? And I don't really hear that from the practitioners in the AI space, that their efforts are to redesign humanity in those ways, or that they're trying to bring ecological consciousness to the planet. Like I'm like waiting to hear that, and I'm not hearing that.
Well, I'm not necessarily expecting that to come from OpenAI or Microsoft or whatever. But like that's why I mentioned the kind of open source AI movement. And just by the way, like I think it's such a joke that OpenAI is called OpenAI is actually not.
It started as an open source nonprofit. I mean, it is the epitome. It started open source nonprofit, and now it's neither open source nor nonprofit.
Although, to be fair, they do have a cap returns model. You know about this?
They do, but it's extremely generous to the investors. But yes, they do have a cap returns model.
Only 100x, I hear.
Yeah, we're going to cap it there.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So what do you think of what Tristan Harris and Center for Humane Technology and their kind of calls for a moment of pause? How are you receiving that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's something we should seriously be considering. It is moving so fast that why not? What's going to be the problem exactly of just taking 6 months or a year or whatever, however long it is, just to sort of assess what's the current state of things. Then again, like this
multipolar traps.
Well, yeah, but also this stuff is already out there. It's all like it's already on millions of computers all over the world. These models and like so the. It's actually it's already quite a difficult thing to put back in the box. I mean, you could say that it'd be easier to stop people training new models, and maybe that's the key thing. I think that's maybe one of the things that they're kind of most interested about, of like actually like kind of restricting, or if you have a GPU farm over a certain capacity, then it has to be registered, with the government, and and so on. So maybe there are things that could be done there, but. It's a question. It's like, is the genie already out of the bottle? And if it is, then like, what's the best, or at least like least bad approach to this? Or and by approach, we could say, what is the way of injecting as much wisdom and compassion into this debate, this field, these people, as effectively as possible. And I think that's a really interesting question. I think that that actually in-person gatherings can have a really important part to play in that. So here we're recording this from Bristol, where we've both been attending the Planet Local Summit by Local Futures. And my experience is that actually, it's having the huge privileged opportunity of being with people in person for a few days can create such a sense of like alignment and mutual care, and really always encourages me to, as a kind of reset of my intentions, and actually how am I living my life, and totally. What's important. So I mean, I'm kind of just riffing here, but like, could that be? Yeah. What would it look like to have like thousands of like kind of AI congresses all over the world in beautiful locations where people working with this technology actually get to kind of like really meet each other and answer the question of like how do we do this in a wise and compassionate way? What's the best that humanity could achieve with this technology, rather than everyone just kind of like being at home disconnected in front of their screens. Of course, there's always going to be people that would never opt into something like this, but something, I think there's something here. People have also talked about something similar just in the context of AI alignment. So then it's not even a case of getting a kind of technologists together. It's just the general population to say, how should we align these things? I think Joe Edelman and Ellie Hain and others at the Institute for Meaning Alignment are doing some really interesting work on this. They just won an Open AI prize on the topic of alignment, and they're coming at it very much from the point of view of values, and of actually coming together to kind of interview people, or getting an AI to interview users about their values, what they hold most dear, and then like kind of tuning models based on what's discovered in that process. Other people I've heard of, I think Richard Dennis Bartlett at some point was talking about like in-person gatherings to do something similar, to talk about, well, what do we hold most dear, and how exactly would we like AIs to reflect that. So potentially a very exciting moment for humanity if something if we get to the point of realizing, wow, like we have to have a global conversation about this in a way that actually we have never really had before. And of course it's been such a sense of isolation and disconnection driven in a big way due to the pandemic, and like the way in which we just simply had to, we did separate ourselves of how could we come back together to make some of the most important choices around this technology.
Yeah. Okay, before I meet you in that, like, okay, we're going to move past the fear and figure out how to Aikido this into global peace. Just one other like objection that seems to be coming up, in addition to the calls for pause, for moratorium, which I don't know enough to kind of just wax poetic about whether that's practical or not. My gut instinct is like the genie's kind of out of the bottle, but I remain open-minded. There's another line of question and pushback on AI that I think is gathering steam, which is like, all of this data. You talked about data as one of those 3 pillars of exponential, growth. We didn't consent to this. And, you can look at how the AI is recreating people's music or art. And, those are very specific cases of question around copyright and intellectual property and whatnot. But there's really a bigger question, right? I mean, we didn't all enter this social media machine and give all of our personal information knowing that 5-10 years down the line, this would all become ingested for the purpose of furthering corporate profits and now mirrored back to us through these new technologies. And, is there an ethical argument? Is there an argument that could root itself in regulatory pauses and real constraint on these technologies? Similar to like how human cloning was really, pushed back against. Do you think that's possible? And how do you think about what's happening in that discourse?
Yeah. Well, don't get me wrong. Like, I've got no love for like corporations as like as an economic model, as a way of doing business. Like I work with a not-for-profit worker cooperative. I'm passionate about the cooperative movement and DAOs that have a kind of cooperative flavor to them. I can also, have a certain amount of gratitude and respect for the corporations, OpenAI, for example, that like have kind of bootstrapped their AI movement to get us to this point. I think it's super important that like the power does not remain in just the hands of like a handful of large technology companies, though. And I think it's important that we do, if we are going to continue down this path, that we look in like how can we actually distribute the power and influence that's kind of connected to this technology as widely as possible. I was just thinking on my way here, actually, like what it means to have like a bioregional AI, given that there's been a lot of chat around economic localization and bioregionalism at this conference this weekend. Like, like AIs for every bioregion, every town, and rather than just like the idea that there's going to be just one or like a handful of extremely powerful models that everyone's going to kind of go to and pray to almost. There's like this kind of like finite pantheon of gods and like would that be viable? Would that be useful to have something, kind of localized AIs? I'm only at the very beginning of that thought process, but we have to, and on the data issue,
the data ethics issue,
the data, I mean, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, like I wasn't surprised. Like I at least feel like I went into using corporate social media with my eyes relatively open of like, they're going to, I'm the product here. Like, what they say, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. It's like, I always had a sense of that. I'm not exactly surprised that our data is being used in this way. I'm also not, delighted about it in some way, or not in particularly in the way of like that we are not seeing any of the profits that these companies are starting to make now. You could argue that like we were kind of we should be considered stakeholders, like shareholders, if you like, in this technology, and we should be seeing at the very least the kind of economic return if there if there is one over the coming years. Then again, like I do think it is amazing that this technology simply exists now. And another part of me wants to like cut these companies a little bit of slack for saying, and to say, okay, like it's, you've proved it's possible, and that is actually awesome. And now let's like work out like the most ethical way forwards from here. And I know people are starting to think about this, or just realizing that like if we don't want, or how exactly are we going to allow or forbid AIs from training on our data in future? Do there need to be easier, more standardized ways of like kind of tagging creative output in the digital realm to market as something that we're okay to feature as part of these systems, or not? It's not an area that I've thought deeply about, but I see it as an important topic.
Yeah. Okay. I guess my last question on the pushbacks is just like, there was, I think, a recent poll in the United States that showed a majority of Americans didn't even support necessarily that these advancements were happening. And from an arc of technological advancement and technological innovations, we haven't really necessarily had that conversation in recent memory that I'm as much aware of. But like this question of what role does civil society get to play, given it is the primary stakeholder in the consequence of all of this. What role does society get to play in saying, actually we don't necessarily want artificial general intelligence? And yeah, it seems like that question is going to come up more and more as the power of these tools reveal themselves. So curious your early thoughts on it.
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's pretty amazing just how many people are so unaware of like what is going on in this area. And I don't mean to like blame people in that, but it's just, even this weekend we've been around a bunch of like extremely intelligent, wise, kind people. AI has come up only a couple of times, mostly in a kind of like just broadly critical way, but there's been no serious discussion on it. And it
reminds me, sorry to interrupt you, it reminds me of my favorite meme lately, which is the alien comes down in the cartoon, and there's a guy like in sunglasses sitting there, and the alien's like, "Are you not surprised?" And the guy says, "Man, I got a lot going on lately." And I feel that way with the AI, with the alien news and everything else. Like we're all just so tunnel vision on our thing that we're not even necessarily recognizing the enormity of this.
It sometimes it can. I mean, the crew that we're with this weekend are very familiar with the kind of tsunami that is the ecological crisis coming towards us.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, there's another tsunami coming from that direction as well.
And maybe faster.
And then what happens? That's how. So in December, I'll be running a residency at Brave Earthing in Costa Rica that Alnora is a co-founder of, called the Futurecraft Residency. And there we do talk about the kind of the exponentials that we're or triple exponential people talk about in the context of AI, and the kind of the exponentially degrading environment and the kind of ecological situation that we face. And for me, the only sensible position in the face of those two exponentials, we could identify others, but those two feel very alive right now for me, maybe you at least as well. It's to confess that we have no idea. Right. We have no idea what the combination of those two things is. Well, I mean, even one would be enough. And of course, there are some people some communities are very focused on just the ecological side of things. Other communities are very focused on the AI side of things, either thinking it's going to turn out really well or being very concerned with existential risk and thinking it's going to turn out very badly, which all of those positions are reasonable. But there's comparatively few thinkers and communities, I would suggest, that are really engaged with both of those topics. One person that comes to mind is Daniel Schmachtenberger, who frequently addresses both of those themes and many more in his writing and speaking. But it seems a little bit siloed to me still. Totally. And I'd be really curious to see how can we encourage more dialogue between those two areas, and in particular the people that are very optimistic about AI with the people that are very pessimistic about the ecological crisis. There's actually there's a film called it's like a half-an-hour film on YouTube that was released just a couple of weeks ago called The Case for Optimism, that is does a pretty good job. Like the first half of it is about the various kind of climate crisis and the possibility of nuclear war and the other manifestations of metacrisis or polycrisis, and then it goes into the best case scenario for AI. But I mean, people in the ecological that are familiar with the ecological crisis talk about kind of naive techno-optimism. I'm sure Al-Noor would be one of the first people to pipe up about this, and of course that's really important to just see the enormity of the ecological crisis and to adopt the position that no normal technology is likely to make any difference in the context of what is coming. However, there is at least a question that maybe AI isn't a normal technology, isn't really like anything we've seen before. And if that's the case, then maybe something is coming down the line which is weirder and hopefully more wonderful than any of us could actually imagine at this point. I don't know how the story turns out.
Yeah, fascinating. I think about that techno-utopian critique, and I hear it also not just that the tools don't match the enormity of the challenges, but also that it's an entirely different thing. This anthropocentric, that humans can somehow control, reduce, engineer our way out of our relationship with the web of life. And in the grander forces of Mother Gaia, is just a foolhardy notion that's been repeated over and over and over. And so if you're racing off the cliff, don't go faster. We have to change the entire paradigm of our approach. And yet, I have a lot of resonance and sympathy for your point of view. Sympathy might be the wrong word, but it's I do get excited. I'm a technologist. I get excited by what's possible. And when the scale of the ecological crisis upon us, when I have engaged in ecological stewardship and land management practices and looked at, how do we help to catalyze regenerative healing processes that are inherent in nature, and align that with our economic system and incentives, and do it at a pace that is commensurate with the challenge of how fast we've destroyed these habitats. It feels very daunting. And so to have some exponential tools in the tool belt, it's very helpful.
Right.
And if we can kind of encode the ethics and orient in those ways, it's very exciting. So yeah, I'm curious, getting to that more positive frame, you mentioned kind of almost bioregionally trained learning models. You mentioned the transparency and the open source and the democratic nature of pushing this into many people's hands. What else, what other glimmers of hope are you maybe spotting out there at the edges of how these technologies might be really in service to life?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes up is just the kind of a couple of aesthetic movements like solar punk and lunar punk. Like solar punk actually kind of is this, right? It is this
Totally.
this vision of kind of ecological civilization, in Jeremy Lent's words from these past days, which I think is a very beautiful phrase, that has or that is using technology like in service of to ecology, to regeneration. And I think, well, yeah, why not? And it isn't realistically, it isn't going away, or isn't going away entirely. Like at least for the next few decades, at least, technology, including high technology like blockchain and AI, is going to be kicking around. So, like, why not answer the question of like how can we turn this to regenerative ends? And it might be wise to consider that in a context of a more localized, more decentralized, possibly like powered down type way of living. So like if whatever technology scheme we come up with, requires like doubling 10 timesing our energy consumption, well, like, okay, maybe that's not so sensible. But like, but actually, in the context of AI, like once the models are trained, like the kind of inference step, it's actually relatively cheapest. So, so yeah, what would a bioregional AI look like? I mean, I guess it's really about the like it's the data question, it's the training data. Like, so, could we? Let's think about indigenous peoples. So what would it look like to train an AI solely on the indigenous wisdom of the Shipibo, which is a community in the Peruvian Amazon that I've worked with a little bit, and then to be able to kind of speak to a kind of like virtual version of the entirety of Shipibo knowledge, and do a similar thing for like indigenous communities all over the planet. Like I've only just thought of that, but like it sounds interesting to me, especially because it it isn't always so. I have lots of questions about the Shipibo way of life, for example, that like I haven't so far had like the possibility, the opportunity to really get answered, to really go into deep dialogue with people from that community. The opportunities to kind of sit with the community don't come up that often. When they do come up, there's often a lot going on. Maybe I could. Maybe this is like maybe what this is telling me is that I should actually go to the Amazon, spend some more time there. But I'll contemplate that. But like that sounds quite solar punk to me. Like indigenous AI. Like what are indigenous AI? And I know there's actually a project called Mycelia that is looking at the intersection between like indigenous communities and Web3 as well. And there is, I think it's called the it's called a Cipher Indigenous Manifesto that was published by an indigenous community in Brazil that's become quite familiar with Web3 technologies. That is actually the authors, indigenous Brazilian folks, are very excited about Web3, and like they say that in the context of thinking about themselves as nations, still dispossessed nations, understanding that at least in the modern context, like currency is an incredibly important like part of a nation, and saying that like we're nations without currencies, and up until now there hasn't been like an easy and effective way, at least, of simply creating one's own currency and then allowing that to circulate and like reinforce both the power of that dispossessed nation and also the identity of it. So indigenous currencies powered by Web3, indigenous AIs. Like I want to be having these conversations, and I'm also prepared to accept the possibility that like actually it's not that useful, and that actually that we just need to just get back to the land and really go more down the path of degrowth and towards some kind of more primitive, like kind of primitive anarchism and so on. And I keep an open mind about that, but this technology is here right now, and could it be useful?
Yeah, I do get very excited about the bioregional lens to, especially things like currency and economics. Gregory Landaway referred to it as like monetary design being a human right. right? And that idea is very powerful. Like we haven't really had that explicitness of discourse happening, and I think Web3 helps evoke it.
Yeah.
That like, wait, who gets to decide the currencies and the forms of value exchange, and why can't every community have its own sovereignty of being able to design its own forms of value exchange? These are artifacts of culture, and I'm channeling a lot of Gregory's words. So yeah, in indigenous context is one of those, but really it's all peoples and places. And obviously I also want to just acknowledge, the many people working on how do we use AI systems for things like more accurate and rapid medical diagnoses and diagnostics, and saving time for doctors and increasing accuracy so that people have healthier outcomes in the medical system, or a lot of people who don't have access to quality education, and having your own personalized mathematics or language tutor on $100 laptop in a slum somewhere, and being able to really uplift the educational experiences for kids who don't have access. It's
and
incredible.
Actually not even needing an internet connection, right? Like increasingly you can run these open source models on your own laptop, which is mind blowing to think like this, the synthesis of all human knowledge, essential, certain kind of human knowledge at least, can now just like run on a laptop, like completely disconnected from the internet anywhere in the world is pretty crazy to me. Yeah.
Well, there's so many other ways we could take this conversation, but maybe just to arc it towards the end here, I want to bring that Web3 and economics lens. You've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And, you mentioned that you work with the New Economics Foundation and this frame that we are often taking as well, which is just like, hey, the economic system is proving to be incompatible with life on the planet. Like, how do we change this? And is Web3, does crypto really offer promise here? How do we make sense of signal from noise? And so, yeah, your reflections on how that's all going and where to from here.
I still believe that like there is, or at least could be, an important role for it. Like you've mentioned, one or sort of that touches on like the key piece, which is just like monetary design, allowing communities to devise their own monetary economic systems that are that fit with their values, that are like kind of customized to kind of bioregional context. And I've in the past actually I've been very interested in Gregory's work and the work of Regen Network. I think there's probably something really important there still. So where am I at with it? Well, I have actually, I kind of, with colleagues from the Metacrisis to XYZ community, took a bit of a step back. We went back to some of the older writing of Daniel Schmachtenberger. He wrote a series of 4 blog articles called the New Economic Series in 2017. And there he describes what he considers to be the kind of 3 kind of core damaging characteristics of the current economic system, which are abstraction, extraction, and accumulation. So abstraction, which is this desire to see everything in terms of money, wealth, the invention of money itself, and then creating this incentive to kind of liquidate the natural world simply to generate money, because it creates this kind of infinite optionality over any kind of good or service into the future. Extraction, just this I mean, closely linked to that, but just this drive towards extraction, and which is actually then also linked to storage technologies, the ability to just like store things and until it's valuable, worthwhile to sell, but better to have like the dead tree, lumber or like sitting in a warehouse than actually growing in the forest, because it means when at the right time you can sell it and make the profit in a kind of easier, more straightforward way. And finally, just like accumulation, just the way in which there's no disincentive to accumulate, really. Like it's the economic system just invites people to obtain as much of that abstraction, these magic tokens that we call money, in just vast, or infinite quantities, essentially. And I found that a very useful frame. And he in the final part of the blog series, he does start to speak about kind of antidotes to those. And so the antidote to abstraction, he speaks of as instantiation, which is really asking the question about like, okay, rather than just saying like, what we need is more money, or what we need is like more GDP. It's like, no, okay, what do we actually want? What do we actually need? And like, well, what we actually want is like healthier, happier communities. What we actually want is cleaner air. What we actually want is like quality education for our kids, and just and trying to get away from the abstraction and towards like the kind of tangible things that actually make life worth living in a way. And so one important debate around that topic is just progress indicators. It's been a long debate now, but just like of the deficiencies of GDP and moving towards like other more suitable measures for thriving societies, like genuine progress indicator or happy planet index. Like when and how are those things going to feature in the Web3 context? First we would have to investigate like what are the kind of measures of success that actors, organizations, protocols are measuring themselves by, and is there a way in which those could be more instantiated in this language, less abstract and more geared towards the kind of the real kind of quality of life measures. In the antidote to extraction is said to be a contextualization. So rather than simply seeing like a forest as like a lumber in waiting, like seeing the context of each tree, seeing that, okay, this is in a certain way, this is lumber. This is also someone's home, or actually home to like many creatures, quite possibly. And what would it mean to cut it down? And being willing to like ask that question every time we seek to extract. And so that for me is closely related to economic localization and pushing doing what we can to encourage local economies to thrive that often have much higher context. And they know, well, you really shouldn't cut down that tree because that tree, is particularly important for these reasons in a way that some multinational corporation coming in just like can't know. There's no reason to think that they would know. It's just to them, it's just another tree. So how can Web3 help in that context? Like, what is the Web3 for kind of economic localization? There's a project called Citizen Wallet, which is doing something quite obvious in many ways, but I think really important, of just saying like all the wallets we have out there at the moment are not geared for like local communities to use. Like it's like the complexity of the gas fees are just entirely inappropriate for most kind of high street users. And furthermore, it's not that easy to simply kind of set up a local currency. That like most of the crypto world is focused on like setting up kind of currencies that are going to circulate globally, that are typically going to make someone or some small amount of people like a lot of money. And like how can we create just really simple, easy ways for people to set up locally or regionally circulating currencies and actually transact with those and creating a wallet that's very much geared to those purposes. So I'm keeping an eye on that. And then accumulation. And the antidote to accumulation, Daniel suggests, is distribution. And so we could think about in the distribution of money itself. The most interesting idea I see in that context is, or one of the most interesting ideas is demurrage, is like money that decays, which of course everything in nature decays. If we were kind of reinventing money, as we see communities like reinvent their own money systems over the coming years, like I'm really curious to see how many of them will actually opt for some form of demurrage, like money that loses its value over time, which of course it has the potential to improve the distribution of money. It's a disincentive to to accumulation, to hoarding, knowing that if it's gonna spoil, and that actually you might as well spend it and keep it circulating in that local economy rather than like trying to just sit on it.
I have a permaculture teacher who, wise elder, likes to say, Matthew, you keep talking about all this regeneration, but don't forget degeneration is the other part of the coin,
right?
Is part of nature too.
Yeah, so I think that I would love to see more experiments with that going on in Web3 space, and then just to like bring in a little bit of AI on that topic, like arguably or I think it's worth considering the possibility that actually the best way of distributing resources in the future will actually not involve money in markets at all. We could ask the question: could it simply be the case that a community-owned AI is I think solving a problem that I think Hayek referred to as the distribution problem or the coordination problem in the context of communism. He said communism is never going to work because like state planning is horribly inefficient, and there's no way that the state could possibly figure out who needs to be producing what and where it needs to be. And he was basically right. It's like and the best, at least at that time, the best option we had were markets, or maybe up until this point, the best option we have were markets as a form, but arguably quite crude form of decentralized collective intelligence. But are we actually about to have sufficiently good forms of new forms of decentralized collective intelligence in the form of AIs that actually kind of could solve that coordination problem, that would be quite an effective way of just giving people signals of what to produce and like allowing people to signal like what their needs are, such that we could actually completely sidestep like money in markets as we know it. So I think that's an interesting possibility, and a way in which kind of AI could slightly not pull the rug out of like kind of the Web3 or some parts of the Web3 community. I think in a quite interesting way.
Crypto getting its own rug pulled would be quite
the ultimate rug
poetic.
Pull. Yeah.
Well, I love the framework, so instantiation, contextualization, and distribution. And I like the entry point of, what's wrong with the economics and monetary system as we see it? And then, how can Web3 help address that, rather than just trying to figure out what does this tool do as the entry point in? And I could certainly go another hour and talk to you about that Web3 framework and space and ideas and riffs, but we'll have to leave it for another time. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your thoughts with us, Stephen. We'll be watching your work with interest. Please keep up the newsletters and help us wayfind in all of these crazy rabbit holes. Any final words or messages you'd like to share?
Well, thank you for creating this wonderful series of podcasts, of conversations. I'm looking forward to listening to many of the people that you've spoken to over the past days myself. And looking forward to seeing this project flourish.
Great. Stephen Reid, thanks so much.
Take care.
All right, what'd you think? Please leave us a comment below and let us know if you have any suggestions for other folks we should speak to in the field of AI. To learn more about Stephen's work, including his newsletter, check out stephenreid.net. There's also a link in the show notes to our conversation with Alnor Lada. All of our episodes and discussions are at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you next time.